Hey, and welcome to the Deep Dive.
Hello.
If you're looking for a shortcut to being well-informed on some pretty complex topics, cutting through the noise.
Getting straight to the point.
Exactly. Getting straight to the core insights from the source material, well, you're in the right place. Stick around.
Definitely.
And hey, if you find these deep dives valuable, maybe do us a quick favor. Hit that subscribe button, maybe give us a like on this video. The more of you who engage, the more responsibility we feel to bring you accurate, well-researched information straight from these sources.
Yeah, it really helps us know we're on the right track.
And we really appreciate you being here with us.
So, for this deep dive, we've been digging into a pretty significant new market entry.
Right.
Our source material, it's based on an in-depth analysis, pulling together various news reports, official company statements, that kind of thing.
And comparative data too, right? Tables and specs.
Exactly. Comparative data tables looking at both the service plan and the hardware specs for this new offering.
Okay, so our mission today is to guide you through all that material. We're going to unpack exactly what this new Trump mobile service and the T1 phone offering actually are. We'll analyze the claims being made, look at the business model described in the sources.
And what it all means.
Yeah, and understand what the analysis suggests it all means for, anyone considering it or just watching. It's about cutting through the marketing speak.
Getting to the core finding.
And getting to what's actually presented in our source material.
Okay, let's do it.
Okay, let's unpack this then. We start with the service side. Our sources report this was announced back on June 16th, 2025.
Right, timed with a political anniversary, the reports note.
Yeah, and right away, the language they use in the announcement, it's strong. It's described as a transformational new cellular service.
Big words.
Offering, quote, top-tier connectivity, unbeatable value, and all-American service for our nation's hardest-working people. Quite a claim.
And the analysis jumps straight into the technical model behind it. It's an MVNO.
A mobile virtual network operator.
Exactly. So what that means, according to the reports, is they don't own their own cell towers. They're not building infrastructure.
Okay.
Instead, they lease network access wholesale from the major carriers. They claim to work with all three.
And the sources say this is pretty common.
Oh yeah, very common. It's a capital-light strategy. Lots of well-known brands do this. Think Mint Mobile, Cricket Wireless. It's standard practice in the industry.
Gotcha. Okay, so the core plan itself is called the 47 plan, and the price point noted in our sources is $47.45 per month. No contract, no credit check needed.
And that number, $47.45.
Yeah, the analysis explicitly states that both the name, the 47 plan, and that specific price are overt political references.
To the 45th president and potentially the 47th.
Right. That's clearly highlighted in the source material. It's not subtle.
No, not at all. And looking at the plan's features, as they're described in the sources, it offers unlimited services.
Unlimited talk, text, data.
Talk, text, and data. However, the analysis clarifies that the high-speed data, well, it's likely capped.
The usual fine print.
Kind of. Reports indicate it's capped at 20 gigabytes before your speeds get significantly throttled, slowed way down.
Okay.
Which, again, is pretty standard for these kinds of unlimited plans from MVNOs. It's unlimited access, just not unlimited high-speed access.
Right. Okay, but here's where they seem to add more value, or try to. They bundle in a bunch of other services.
Yeah, the bundle is key here.
The sources list telehealth services, virtual medical and mental health appointments.
Okay.
A prescription discount program, 247 roadside assistance that's provided by a company called Drive America.
Right.
And a device protection plan for the phone itself.
So quite a few extras.
Yeah, and they also put a lot of emphasis on free international calling to over 100 countries.
And they frame that for military families specifically.
That's what the source says, yeah.
Okay.
Framed specifically as a benefit for military families. And the claim of U.S.-based customer service available 204/7.
Via a dedicated number, 888-TRUM-45.
Right, promising you'll speak to a real person.
Okay, so when the sources analyze the strategy behind all this,
Yeah, what's the take?
they suggest the value proposition. It's maybe less about being the absolute cheapest plan or having the most raw data, purely on those telecom terms.
The price isn't the main thing.
Well, the $47.45 price, as noted, seems like political messaging first.
Yeah.
The bundle of services, the health, the transport, the device protection that looks deliberately curated.
Curated how?
To appeal to a specific demographic, possibly aligning with what the analysis calls a preparedness mindset. addressing practical anxieties.
Ah, okay, like covering different bases.
Exactly. The analysis frames it as creating a package of products, less about a purely competitive phone plan, more about using that symbolic branding and a feature set aligned with a specific political identity.
Affinity marketing, they call it.
That's the term used, yeah.
Yeah.
Selling identity and values along with the service. And if we look at the source's comparison table.
The one comparing it to Mint, Cricket, Visible.
Right. Comparing the $47.45 price and that reported 20 GBP high-speed cap to others, well, Mint's Unlimited starts lower, around $30, though that requires annual payment. Cricket's Unlimited is maybe $55. Visible Plus is around $45, but offers more premium data.
So it's not the cheapest or the one with the most data?
Based only on that comparison data and the source, no. The conclusion in the analysis is that Trump Mobile isn't positioned as the market leader purely on price or data volume. It's claimed unbeatable value. Well, it seems to rely heavily on a customer really valuing those specific bundled extras in the brand itself.
Okay, that makes sense. Let's pivot now to the hardware side of things. They also announced the T1 phone.
Right, the phone.
Described in the marketing as a sleek gold smartphone with an American flag etching.
Very on brand.
Set for an August release, priced at $499, and positioned as both premium and, this is key, American-made.
And right away, the analysis points to something, well, pretty critical.
What's that?
The name, T1 phone. It's identical to a line of smartphones that Vivo, a major Chinese electronics manufacturer, has been producing since 2021.
Identical name, Vivo.
Identical name, Vivo. And the sources explain this concept called white labeling.
Okay, what's white labeling?
It's basically where a company takes a pre-existing device design from an OEM, an original equipment manufacturer like Vivo in this case, and just rebrands it as their own, puts their logo on it.
Why do that?
It helps them avoid the, massive research and development costs, the manufacturing setup costs required to build a phone completely from scratch. Vivo, according to the reports, has a whole range of T1 models already out there.
Okay, so what are the announced specs for this Trump T1 phone, the $499 one?
As reported, it's got that $499 price tag, 6.78 or maybe 6.8-inch punch hole AMOLED display, 120 hertz refresh rate.
Pretty standard premium specs?
Yeah, a 50 MP main camera, a 5,000 mAh battery, and both fingerprint sensor and AI face unlock.
So how do those specs line up with the Vivo T1 phones?
Well, when the source material compares them in detail, especially in its table 2, the alignment with various existing Vivo T1 models is significant.
How significant?
Very. Vivo T1 variants already feature AMOLED displays of similar size, 120 hertz refresh rates, 50 or even 64 megapixel cameras, 5,000 mAh batteries across different versions they've released internationally.
Okay.
And what's also striking in the source's comparison are the prices of those Vivo models.
Lower?
Much lower. The analysis mentions they range roughly from about 180 euro to 300 euro. So maybe 200, 330 US, roughly.
Wow, compared to $499.
Exactly. So based only on this convergence, the matching name, the very similar specs, the known practice of white labeling the source's analysis strongly suggests the Trump T1 phone is in fact a rebranded Vivo model.
Manufactured in China, presumably.
That's the strong implication from the source's analysis, yes.
Which brings us back to that core marketing claim, proudly designed and built in the United States.
The central claim.
Clearly intended to position it as, the patriotic choice.
And the sources really critically examine that specific claim. They bring in a direct precedent.
Don't tell me. The Freedom Phone.
The Freedom Phone, exactly. The analysis details how the Freedom Phone, launched back in 2021, used very, very similar America First marketing themes.
And it was also $499, right?
Precisely the same $499 price point. But, as the reporting quickly exposed, it was just a rebranded Chinese phone, a Numi DG phone that cost about $119.
Ouch.
Yeah. The source even includes a quote from the Freedom Phone's creator, basically admitting it's practically impossible to build phones entirely domestically right now.
Wow. So the exact same price point, the same fundamental story, revealed to be a rebranded Chinese phone.
Just a striking parallel highlighted by the sources. And the analysis also reminds us of Donald Trump's own past public statements criticizing companies like Apple and Samsung.
Right, for manufacturing overseas.
For manufacturing their phones in China or India. Yeah. Which the source views as sort of an implicit acknowledgement that, yeah, large-scale domestic phone manufacturing isn't really happening currently.
Okay, so bringing all that together, the likely Vivo origin, the Freedom Phone precedent, even those past comments, what's the conclusion from the source analysis on the built in the USA claim?
The source concludes it's almost certainly a marketing fiction. That's the phrase used.
A marketing fiction.
Described as a deliberate and strategic falsehood designed specifically to appeal to the target demographics' values, which, the analysis notes, creates this profound contradiction between the patriotic ideal being sold and the likely reality of the product's origin.
Okay, let's shift gears a bit and look at the business structure behind this whole venture.
Right. Who's actually running the show?
We know Donald Jr. and Eric Trump are public faces,
Yeah.
executives of the Trump Organization, but the sources identify 3 specific entities involved here.
Yes. There's T1 Mobile LLC that's described as the operational company, the one actually running the service.
Okay.
Then there's DTTM Operations LLC, which owns the trademark.
The Trump name trademark.
Exactly. And then the Trump Organization itself is also named as involved.
So how do they fit together? What's the setup?
Well, the fascinating aspect here, as explained in the analysis, is the brand licensing model they're using.
Brand licensing?
Yeah. DTTM Operations LLC, the trademark owner, licenses the use of the Trump trademark to T1 Mobile LLC, the operator.
Ah, so the Trump Organization doesn't run Trump Mobile directly.
That seems to be the structure described. This setup allows the Trump brand to profit, presumably through licensing fees, though the source doesn't specify amounts while creating legal distance.
Distance from what?
From the day-to-day operations, and importantly, from potential liabilities. The sources point to a prominent disclaimer.
The fine print again.
Right, stating that Trump mobile services and phones are not designed, developed, manufactured, or sold by the Trump Organization.
Interesting.
And the license is described as limited and terminable. So the brand has an exit strategy if needed. It's structured as a relatively low-risk arrangement for the Trump brand itself, according to the analysis.
The source analysis points out something concerning about this structure.
Yes, a critical and concerning aspect, as they put it. There is a complete lack of public information about who actually owns and manages T1 Mobile LLC.
The operator. No names.
No names of principals or executives mentioned in the reports, just a generic media email address. The analysis notes that even searches of state business registration databases didn't reveal specifics, emphasizing the absence of public information about who is running the operation.
That seems odd for a company selling phone service to the public.
Highly unusual, the sources stress.
Yeah.
And problematic. This opacity raises significant questions highlighted in the material.
Like what?
Well, it prevents basic due diligence. The analysis asks, who are the actual operators? What's their experience? Do they have a track record in telecom? Are they financially stable? Critically, how will they handle customer data security and privacy?
Right, fundamental questions you'd want answered.
Absolutely. The source suggests this lack of transparency seems to prioritize shielding the operators over building actual consumer trust. The analysis goes so far as to call the anonymity of T1 Mobile LLC the most significant red flag.
A red flag.
And describes the overall corporate architecture as a calculated strategy to monetize political capital while externalizing risk. When the source mentions penetrating the corporate veil, it's talking about the difficulty in seeing past these legal entities to understand the real people and the real money behind T1 Mobile LLC information that just isn't public according to these reports.
Okay, so let's try to synthesize this. What do the sources present as the core business model here?
Fundamentally, it's framed as less about competing head-on with Verizon or T-Mobile on technology, or being the absolute lowest price leader.
It's more about
converting political loyalty into revenue. The analysis describes it as primarily a cultural and political model, driven heavily by affinity branding.
Okay, explain that more.
Well, the analysis points out just how explicit the political symbolism is, woven through everything.
We saw that with the name and price.
Exactly. The name Trump Mobile, the $47.45 price for the 47 plan, the slogans referencing America First, the launch timing on that political anniversary. Even the phone's look, the gold finish, the American flag etching.
It's all very deliberate.
Extremely deliberate, according to the analysis. It's designed to clearly position the product as for a specific political group, making the act of purchasing it almost an act of identity affirmation of belonging.
And the source material also mentions this idea of fitting into a parallel economy.
Yes, it touches on that.
Yeah.
Aiming to serve conservatives who might distrust mainstream tech companies or corporations, fitting alongside other ventures like, say, Truth Social, creating an alternative ecosystem.
So how does the analysis view this politicized model overall? What are the implications?
Well, the analysis suggests that the intended core competitive advantage is that political loyalty. The idea seems to be that this loyalty might be powerful enough to override competition based on traditional factors, like who has the best price or the fastest network speeds.
A test of political identity in the marketplace.
Precisely. A test of how sticky that identity is when it comes to consumer choices. However,
There's always a however.
the sources are very clear about the significant business risks this creates. The brand equity is completely tied to one single, highly polarizing individual.
Which makes it vulnerable.
Exceptionally vulnerable, the analysis states, to political events, to legal challenges, to shifts in public opinion about that individual. Forecasting becomes incredibly difficult. The analysis actually calls the venture exceptionally volatile and describes it as less a technology company and more a political affinity club with a recurring subscription fee.
Wow. Okay, this brings us right back again to the Freedom Phone. That precedent seems crucial in the source analysis.
It's frequently referenced, yes, framed as a recent and illustrative failure in this exact market space.
Because the parallels are so strong.
Uncannily strong, according to the analysis. It details the Freedom Phone playbook. Launched 2021, targeted the exact same conservative pro-Trump consumers, used intense patriotic marketing.
Claims about anti-censorship, privacy.
Right, the Patriot App Store, Freedom OS, all marketed heavily alongside patriotism, all for that $499 price.
But the reality, as the source's recap, was very different.
Completely different. The sources reiterate, the $499 Freedom Phone was exposed as a rebranded $119 Chinese Umidiki phone. The special Freedom OS was just basic Android with different icons. It was widely criticized, with some reports quoted by the source even labeling it a grift.
So remind us of the direct, specific parallels the sources draw between that and this new Trump Mobile T1 phone venture.
The analysis lists them clearly, suggesting a deliberate replication of the model. 1, targeting the exact same niche audience. 2, using very similar patriotic marketing while obscuring the foreign origin of the hardware. 3, the identical $499 price point, which, given the likely actual cost of the phone, represents a massive markup.
Paying a premium for the brand and the message?
That's the implication. And 4, the fundamental model itself. Take a relatively cheap, Chinese-sourced phone, slap on patriotic branding, and sell it at a significant premium to a politically motivated audience, claiming it's a unique America First product.
And based on all these parallels, what does the source analysis predict or suggest about this new venture?
The analysis views the Trump mobile venture not as some kind of innovation, but essentially as a more polished and officially licensed iteration of the same discredited model.
More polished because of the official Trump branding.
Exactly. The licensing adds that veneer of legitimacy that the Freedom Phone lacked. But the source concludes that the Freedom Phone saga provides a clear and disturbing precedent. It suggests this playbook is based on exploiting the target audience's trust and political fervor, which raises, quote, serious questions about the venture's intent and its respect for its potential customers.
Okay, let's turn now to maybe the most critical topic, security.
Yeah, this is crucial.
Yet source analysis highlights this as particularly important, right? Because of two main factors.
That's right. First, the namesake's own documented history regarding phone usage and security protocols during his presidency. And second, the likely origin of the T1 phone hardware itself.
Let's start with the history. What does the source material detail there?
It documents a clear preference for using personal, unsecured phones over the official, secure ones provided. Resistance to security protocols. His personal phone number reportedly being widely circulated.
Which must have worried security officials.
Profoundly. The source is, quote, officials expressing profound consternation and fears of surveillance by foreign intelligence, specifically mentioning China. The reports note extraordinary steps the White House had to take.
Like what?
Like severely restricting call memos, moving sensitive conversations onto classified systems. Sometimes, according to the source, specifically to cover up the content of those calls, because they were happening on insecure lines.
And the source material also points out that his phone calls themselves have been central to major political and legal crises.
Yes, absolutely. The analysis highlights specific examples. The infamous call with Ukraine's president that led directly to his first impeachment.
Right.
The call with Georgia election officials find 11,780 votes, which became key evidence in a criminal indictment against him. And the unexplained gap in White House phone logs during the critical hours of January 6, which the sources suggest strongly implies the use of other unrecorded phones to conceal communications. The analysis basically frames the Trump phone call itself as this recurring motif of controversy.
So how does the analysis connect that specific history to this current product offering, the phone and the service?
It points out what it calls the profound irony and a tangible risk. You have a brand name that the analysis directly links to a history of, let's say, disregard for communication security protocols.
Okay.
Now marketing a communication service and a device. Consumers are essentially being asked to trust their most personal data, call logs, text messages, location data, browsing activity, to an enterprise bearing this name and operating under this opaque structure we discussed.
And that risk is compounded by the phone's likely origin.
Exactly. The analysis notes the risk is amplified by the likely Chinese origin of the hardware, going back to the Vivo T1 comparison. It cites the security concerns raised even during the Freedom Phone analysis, and it brings in China's known reputation for state-sponsored cyber espionage, the potential for hardware backdoors.
The reason the U.S. government banned companies like Huawei and ZTE.
Precisely. The sources mention the U.S. government banning certain Chinese telecom companies from supply chains, specifically because of these national security fears.
Okay, so pulling all that security analysis together, what's the bottom line from the sources for consumers?
Based only on the evidence and analysis presented in the source material, the combination of this specific brand history, the likely high-risk hardware origin, and that completely anonymous operating company, T1 Mobile LLC, well, it creates what the source calls a deeply concerning security posture.
Deeply concerned.
Yes. The analysis states flatly that without transparent, independent security audits of the hardware, the software, the network operations, the security and privacy for consumers must be considered highly questionable. The source calls this specific issue the most critical and least addressed risk for anyone thinking of signing up.
All right, let's bring this deep dive towards a conclusion then. Synthesizing what the source material presents overall, this venture seems like a really complex mix.
Yeah, it's business, it's political branding, it's almost a cultural artifact in some ways.
And the sources view it less as a true telecom disruption.
And more as a test case, a test of the power of political identity in the consumer marketplace. Can you monetize belief to this degree?
So for potential investors, what's the assessment from the sources?
The assessment is pretty clear. This isn't framed as the traditional tech or telecom investment.
Yeah.
It's described more like a high-risk brand licensing and political memorabilia play.
Memorabilia play, wow.
Yeah. Its value, according to the analysis, is almost entirely tied to political capital, not underlying technical innovation or market share in the usual sense. And there are significant risks flagged, especially around that questionable built in the USA claim, and most critically, the profound opacity of T1 Mobile LLC's ownership and operations.
That blind gamble point.
Exactly. The source calls it a blind gamble, noting that investors would really need to penetrate the corporate veil to somehow get visibility into the actual people and financial terms behind T1 Mobile LLC to even begin to assess the risk and operational competence, which currently seems impossible based on public info.
Okay, and then for potential consumers, what guidance does the source analysis offer them?
The source suggests that potential consumers should really understand that the decision to purchase this offering, well, based on the analysis, it's framed primarily as an act of political expression.
More politics than pragmatism.
More an act of political expression than a pragmatic consumer choice based purely on comparing features, price, and security relative to the rest of the market.
And does the source detail specific points for consumers to weigh?
Yes, it recaps the key findings for them.
Yeah.
First, the value of the 37 plan. Its tangible worth depends heavily on whether you, the consumer, actually need and will use those specific bundled services, telehealth, roadside assistance, etc.
Right.
If you don't need those, the source's comparison suggests it's not competitively priced just on data or basic costs compared to other MVNOs.
Okay, what about the phone?
Second, the $499 T1 phone. The source analysis is unequivocal here. It's analyzed as almost certainly being a significantly marked up, rebranded Chinese smartphone.
The political identity tax.
That's the phrase the analysis uses, yeah. You're effectively paying a premium for the brand and the political statement, and that built in the United States claim. The advice is to view it with extreme skepticism.
And the biggest risk.
And third, most importantly, security and privacy. The source views this as the greatest unknown and most significant risk. Why? Because of the brand's documented history, the likely hardware origin in China, and that anonymous operator, T1 Mobile LLC. The analysis recommends avoiding this service entirely if data security and privacy are key concerns for you, because there is simply no public evidence presented to suggest it's secure.
Wow. Okay, that brings us pretty much to the close of this deep dive then. The source material's concluding analysis seemed to suggest this venture is a fascinating, maybe even concerning example of a business model where the tech specs, the market competitiveness, maybe they're secondary.
Right. It functions more as a symbol of tribal affiliation, a case study, as the analysis puts it, in monetizing belief by leveraging patriotism and maybe even grievance.
And the final thought presented in the sources adds another layer to that.
It does. It suggests that the venture's apparent reliance on a likely deceptive claim, the hardware origin plus its replication of that failed Freedom Phone playbook, and the sheer opacity of its operators. Well, it could suggest a potentially cynical view of its own target audience.
So?
The model seems to operate on the premise that for the true believer, ideological alignment might be more important than product integrity, transparency, or even security. But regardless of whether it ultimately succeeds or fails commercially, the source highlights it as a really significant cultural and economic data point.
Yeah,
illustrating this ongoing fragmentation of the consumer landscape along political lines and the potential for these alternative politically branded economies to emerge. It really shows how something as mundane as a phone can be marketed not just as a tool, but as an emblem of conviction.
which leaves us with a final provocative thought for you, our listener, to consider, building on everything we've unpacked today based on the source material. In an age where products can become these powerful emblems of conviction, how do you evaluate the claims made by politically branded goods and services? And what does this specific venture, as analyzed by our sources, tell us about navigating trust in this increasingly fragmented marketplace?
Something to think about.
Definitely. Thanks for joining us for this deep dive. We really hope this analysis, drawn straight from the source material, was insightful for you.
Hope it was useful.
And if it was, please do give this video a like. It helps us know you're interested in these kinds of deep dives into complex topics.
Yeah, your engagement really helps us understand what resonates.
Absolutely. We are truly grateful for you watching and listening. Thanks again.
Thanks, everyone.